Lines and lineups. Holden Kushner here. We got 5 games. We'll go down just like we do in DFS, but first we'll get to the betting side of things. Lines and lineups with me. And we got Kevin Rogers from Vegas Insider, who is literally locked in a closet. Grant Neiford from RotoGrinders. We'll get the DFS perspective from him. K-Rod, you're on fire in college basketball, as I see on Vegas Insider. So what is won you a trip to what? The recyclables closet? What the hell are you doing today?
Yes, due to some meetings here at our offices at Vegas Insider in South Florida. Also, we're moving. We're kind of in transition. So I needed to find the only place that I can have quiet. And this is the only place that's quiet. So I apologize for the setup, but really it doesn't matter. You think it's not like Holden sitting in front of the Capitol either. It's not making out to be that. He's got the White House behind him.
Needle.
I don't even live
look at
here
Grant
anymore.
too. Look at you guys.
I even brought the Space Needle.
I don't live in D.C. We both live in Denver, but we didn't want to get new backgrounds. So he's got Seattle there. All right, screw it. Let's get into this game. These games. Before we do that, if you're watching on our YouTube stream, make sure you hit like because you love us so much, and then subscribe as well. So that's what we're doing. Like, subscribe, our RotoGrinders YouTube channel. Bears, Packers, Rams, Dallas, Houston, Tennessee, Atlanta, San Francisco. Then Sunday Night Football, we'll do a showdown slate for DFS, and then we'll get Kevin's take on Buffalo at Pittsburgh. So, guys, let's start with this. We got a 1 o'clock game, Chicago at Green Bay. Packers open 7-point favorites. Why the huge line move? K-Raj down to the Packers laying 4.5, and then the over-under at 41. That's a pretty big, significant move here.
Well, you look at number one with the Bears, that they were left for dead for a while, and now they've come back to life. It's probably too little too late at this point at 7-6 for them. And last time they played the Packers, we remember that game back in week 1. It wasn't pretty, and Green Bay won 10-3 at Soldier Field. You look at it from the one perspective that the Bears did a pretty good job defensively, holding the Packers just the 1 touchdown, but also the Bears could do nothing offensively in that game. But a little bit of a drop here, and the Packers a 4.5, 5-point favorite, depending on where you look. And Chicago coming off of this win over Dallas last week. They've quietly won 4 or 5. No one's talking about this Bears team and what they've been able to do of late. And now they're heading to Lambeau Field to take on the Packers, who coming off a loss to Washington, or a win rather against Washington, a non-cover, where they won 20-15. And look, the Packers the last few weeks, they've beaten teams that they should be beating, the Giants and Redskins. But at the same time, when you look back at it for Green Bay, you kind of wonder, are they fooling us a little bit? Because let's go back through some of their wins, Holden. They beat the Redskins, who we know aren't very good. They beat the Giants, who are mired in this long losing streak. They beat Carolina, who we see now is totally fallen apart. They beat Kansas City on the road without Mahomes. Now was a game that the Chiefs were down early, came back and took the lead, went back and forth. The Packers still won at Arrowhead, but no Mahomes. They beat Oakland. They beat Detroit, a game they should have lost. They beat Dallas, who we see isn't very good. So really for Green Bay, give me the good win for them. And that's where for the Packers, you're not too sure because they were blown out by San Francisco. They were blown out by a not-so-great Charger team. And that's where I kind of question with Green Bay moving forward that where's that really good win for them?
Well, what you're hoping is that Trubisky continues to run the ball like he did last week, and you're hoping he doesn't turn the ball over a whole bunch. Basically, it's your faith in Trubisky as opposed – for me, it's my faith in Trubisky as opposed to my faith in Green Bay. And you ask me, I'm betting against Trubisky. Now, is it enough to go 4.5? I don't know, but it was obviously too much to lay 7.
Well, but also, too, just going to the total sides to jump ahead, we saw a few times last week, and it seems like this has worked in the past, but it depends on the situation. We saw 3 divisional matchups this past week in the NFL, a rematch of the first time. Throw out Dolphins-Jets because it really wasn't a convincing score the first time around to go this angle as far as going the opposite way. Atlanta-Carolina was low-scoring, high-scoring game second time around. Rams-Seahawks, high-scoring game, low-scoring the second time around. And the third game that I am right now blanking on that I have to find was Detroit, Minnesota. That was 42-30 the first time around and then went low scoring the second time. So the point is here, 10-3 the first time with Green Bay and Chicago. You wonder now if it's going to move up a little bit. You're going to see some more scoring, and we've seen Chicago. And granted, the argument with Green Bay, I said that they weren't beating anybody. I know Chicago really hasn't had a lot of great wins either, but at least Chicago's offense has produced a little bit more the last few weeks, so that's a positive. I'd almost rather look at the over of 41 more so than the side in this game, just because I think that after seeing each other the first time around, that these teams, the limited preseason snaps for these guys, that maybe now we see both these teams get in the 20s.
All right, Grant, let's get to the DFS side of things. I'm just going to go with the DraftKings prices here. Devontae Adams didn't have a great game week 1 against Chicago. I'm going to wipe that off the books. Aaron Jones, he can win you a week. Allen Robinson tore up Green Bay. He's been a fairly consistent option. There's Rodgers, there's Trubisky, there's Miller, there's Tariq Cohen and Montgomery. Do you see any of these players falling into your GPP pool?
So the first guy that I think would fall in my GPP pool is going to be Aaron Jones. Going up against Chicago is not really the greatest matchup in the world for most positions, but a pass-catching running back like Aaron Jones is actually kind of beneficial. They give up a large volume of targets to opposing running backs. Aaron Jones, over the last 2 weeks, 7 targets, 6 targets. He can get it done in the receiving game, and he can absolutely get it done in the red zone and end up with a few touchdowns. So he's a guy that could potentially have 30-point upside in any given matchup, and this one with his high volume of targets is another one that could happen here. Not going to draw a lot of ownership because Chicago is a tough defense, so I think he's the first guy you can look at. Next guy is Devontae Adams. I know it's not a good matchup, but he's a guy that can get 10, 12 targets in a spot, and Rodgers will throw to him consistently and can throw to often. He has some red zone equity, so a 10-target, 2-touchdown game is not out of the question there. So both of those guys are in my tournament pool, but I don't know if they are the mainstay, anywhere close to a main stake in there. And the last guy, Tariq Cohen, if we are expecting Chicago to be trailing later on this game, Green Bay not great versus the run, and they give up a decent volume of targets to opposing running backs here. Cohen, we know, can get heavily involved in the receiving game and can break off a large run. He really hasn't done it so far this year and hasn't had a breakout game, but we know that it's absolutely within the realm of possibilities with his offense doing a little bit better, Trubisky playing a little bit better. We could absolutely see him with a decent game in this one. Outside of that, just really not a whole lot that I want to go with. Green Bay's been pretty good versus the pass. Robinson has been good recently. I think he still is in play, but not really someone that I want to roster. I just don't see him really getting it done here. It's in the probability of outcomes, but not a guy I want to go with. So really for me, it's just Adams and it's Jones, and it's strictly playing for their upside. I don't think I'm going with Rodgers. I don't think I'm playing Trubisky. Both of them are priced where they should be for this matchup. So not a whole lot in this game, considering it's one of the largest slates we've had all season. So you don't really need to go with any game in particular. I think this one's mostly a cross-off for me.
What about Anthony Miller? Anything there? 6'6" and 9 and 3 targets.
So like in the 5 to 6.5K range, there's way too many other good wide receiver options on the slate. I've already looked through everything. And so I don't think he ends up making the cut. I know that he's had some good games recently. I know he's put up 10 points in 4 straight, and he's had a 26-point game in there. But I just don't see him going with a big spot here. And there's so many other options on this slate in the 5 to 6.5K range where there's very few possible outcomes where he's the guy that ends up winning you GPP.
Hey, K-Raj, just real quick on the game total there. Again, it's at 41. You were talking about maybe a difference from the first game to the second game, a big swing really for a lot of different games last week. But there is some data that the second meeting in divisional matchups usually does go under. I mean, do you have any take on that? And then, the first game ended at 13. 41's a low total. Do you read into that? If it is so low, maybe that's the way to go?
When you go the first time around, Holden, and you see what the total was between these two teams, it was 47. So now you're dropping at 6 points, and I think we probably overshot it the first time around, considering they're both pretty good defenses. And again, that first Thursday night game where you get nothing from the preseason, so these guys just feeling each other out, and you had the one touchdown, and the Bears had some opportunities in that game. Last year, I guess to go to your point, in the first meeting between these two, if you guys remember, that was the game that Chicago had the 20-0 lead at Lambeau. Aaron Rodgers got hurt. He came back in the second half, and the Packers won 24-23. The game went over the total of 45. The second matchup at Soldier Field went under 46.5 on a 24-17 game won by Chicago. So that one actually a point and a half higher than the first one. Now you're dropping 6 points. I just think that these teams will find a way to maybe get to 24-20, 23-20, 23-19, somewhere in that range. I just find it hard to believe to think this is going to be a 17-10 game the second time around. And, when you look at Aaron Rodgers, at least his 2 worst performances so far have come out west against the 49ers and the Chargers, where it's a tough adjustment going out there, staying in the central time zone. I think the offense will be fine. And Trubisky, we joke about him. He's not great, but the offense has been better. So I got to think that it's not asking too much to get to that number.
Yeah, as long as they run Trubisky a little bit, I think that offense will be just fine. Hey, real quick, Grant, when you look at games with low totals, you could even go back to Monday Night Football with the Eagles and the Giants. I mean, it looked like a bunch of garbage. On paper, the weather was bad, but this is always a way to differentiate yourself a little bit. If you landed on Slayton, if you landed on Ertz, if you played that Thursday to Monday slate or Sunday Monday slate, there's still guys that are probably going to give you a little bit of leverage going to these low total games.
Yeah, no, it absolutely can happen. I think totals obviously are not just basically 50% ends up slightly over, 50% ends up slightly under. There's a massive range of outcomes. And the Giants game, it was more about the fact that the Giants and the Eagles both are teams that can give up massive plays at any given time. So it's just how many of those massive plays are going to happen. A lot of times it's 0. Sometimes it's 2 or 3. So a guy like Slayton goes off for a massive play and ends up with a touchdown. It can happen. Gaining leverage on games are finding spots where there is a low-owned guy with a massive ceiling. I just don't see it too much in this game outside of Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, 2 guys with massive amounts of talent that can break off giant plays against any team.
We're going to get to the Rams in Dallas in just a second. I want to remind everybody watching us on YouTube right now, like and subscribe to the RotoGrinders YouTube channel. 425 Rams at Dallas. This was a wild one here. Dallas opened 4-point favorites. I don't know if this was a look-ahead line, but this is a pick 'em. I mean, obviously, looking at what the Rams did on Sunday night, they looked very impressive. We got an over-under of 48.5 or 49. Let's start with the total here. Why the movement?
Well, it goes back to this, Holden, and I think that a lot of people don't know this, but that opening line comes out about a week or 10 days or so before, and it gets released if that's coming from the Westgate Superbook out in Las Vegas. So obviously we see a lot of movement with it just because the Rams played so well against Seattle Sunday night, and we see the train wreck that Dallas is right now. And now this is very fair that the Cowboys should not be favored or be a pick 'em at least against a Rams team that has stepped it up and now has come back from maybe not being a playoff team to being right in the mix of the wild card. And the Rams at 8-5 off a nice win over Seattle on Sunday night. And they've won 3 or 4. They've been excellent defensively. I know you could say throw out one game, the Baltimore game, and Baltimore's destroyed everyone or at least beaten everyone over the last 2 months. But the Rams, though, allowed 12 to Seattle, which included a pick 6. Allowed 7 to Arizona, 7 to Chicago, 17 to Pittsburgh, 10 to Cincinnati, 10 to Atlanta, even 20 to San Francisco. So this is a nice stretch where they had one clunker against the Ravens, who have been outstanding, and the Rams' defense has really stepped up. And at least offensively, they've been better after they slumped for a few weeks. And then you look at Dallas, and right now, how can you make a case for them? It's really tough considering what happened against Buffalo on Thanksgiving, against Chicago, digging themselves that hole. They went up 7-0 last Thursday night, but then could do nothing after that and scored a couple late touchdowns. But they were already losing that game, and they were way out of it. I just think the Cowboys right now, even in desperation mode, I'm not saying I love the Rams here, Holden, but as far as Dallas goes, I mean, this is a team that, 7-9 can win you the division, but it's just hard to back them at this point. That this is a team that needs to score a bunch of points, and they are 0-7 this year when scoring 30 or less. And when the Rams defense is playing the way it is, I don't think that the Cowboys can win a low-scoring game.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you on that, but it is the NFL, so who the hell really knows? But we are getting some good information from you on this. On the other side, Grant, a couple things I noticed just from DK here. First of all, Cooper Kupp is 6,500. Robert Woods is 6,200. So I wonder if Kupp might be the GPP play there, although Robert Woods has just been terrific. So let's start with that, and then I want you to get into Goff and whether or not you're starting to buy into him.
So this is probably the best game on the entire slate for fantasy. So I'm going to start off with Goff here. Just real simple. Every single good defense he went against, he was horrible. Absolutely horrible. We look at the stretch: Baltimore, Chicago, Pittsburgh. He did fine against Cincinnati and Atlanta, San Francisco. Like the good defenses he's played in the last 8 weeks, he's averaged about 5 points. The bad defenses, he's averaged about 22, 23 points. So he's going up against the Dallas defense that's not good, not great, but it's just kind of mediocre. And so Goff sitting there at 6,100 is a guy that can absolutely put up massive numbers. And they'll probably be passing the ball a decent amount. Then we look at the wide receivers. Kupp, for his upside, 6,500 is way too cheap. Woods, what he's been doing recently, 6,200 is way too cheap. So both those guys, if Goff is going to see a large volume of throws in this matchup here, both those guys could potentially be in for a big game. We look at Higbee and what he's done recently. With Everett out, 11 targets last week, 8 targets the week before. Dallas gives up a lot of targets to opposing tight ends. Higbee could be in for a massive volume. He's one of the few cheap guys on the slate. He's going to go largely overlooked because a lot of the higher-priced tight ends are very, very good spots this week. And then we look at Gurley. Dallas gives up tons of receiving work to opposing running backs. Gurley, last 4 weeks, 23, 19, 25 carries. Going up against Dallas in a game where they could potentially be up with his potential touchdown equity. I know Brown's been snaking some touchdowns recently, but Gurley still has some touchdown equity in any given matchup here. And he's getting some receiving work and should get some receiving work here. $6K for Gurley when he's starting to look like he's going to get similar workload to what we've seen in the past. Absolutely too cheap. And then we look over the other side. Can
I just say Amari Cooper since he's at home? Just start there.
You can like Amari Cooper is not even my favorite guy. Like I believe that they will probably shadow him with Ramsey. And so there's a Gallup game. Like we've seen massive games from Gallup multiple times this season. I mean, he has 4 10-plus target games this season, and he ended up with over 100. We know he can break off a deep catch at any given time, and he has some touchdown equity. He is only 5.7K. If we see 10 targets to him, we're probably going to see 100 yards. We're probably going to see a touchdown. Going up against the Rams, if Cooper is shadowed by Ramsey, then Gallup is an absolutely fantastic GPP play with more upside at 5,700 than most of the guys have on the slate. But if they're not going to shadow with Ramsey, then yes, Cooper, 6,500. We've seen him put up 30-point games before. It's pretty much with him. We know he's either going to get 15-plus or like 5 or less. He's very inconsistent, but they are probably going to be throwing the ball a decent amount in this game. Yes, the Rams' defense has been good recently, but this is clear mispricing on every single person in this entire game. I don't understand it, and this is my favorite game stack on the entire board, and I don't see that changing before the end of the weekend. And I don't know if people are going to fully buy into Jared Goff and how good he's been recently when they're looking at his game logs and they see a 6, a 6, a 6, a 2 in his last 8 games. So this is probably going to go lower owned than it should be. And I think this is going to be by far the best game for fantasy this weekend.
Well, stop talking about it then. I'm sorry I asked you the question. We could get the ownership down a little more. You didn't even bring up Zeke. We'll get to that in a second. What do you think about 48.5, 49K, Raj? This is a healthy game total. Might be the highest total on the slate.
Just looking at the numbers with the Rams holding and just going back to at least defensively, that's 7-1 to the under the last 8 for the Rams, and the only over was that Ravens game, which was 45-6 and went over 47. So, that one you could have argued could have been another under for the Rams. And for Dallas, it's just hard because their offense has looked really good against bad teams. And when they play good teams and good defenses, they scored 15 against Buffalo, 9 against New England, 10 against the Saints. That's where it's really hard to make that jump and say that this is a team that can win a shootout against the Rams, because I don't think it's going to get to that. But they also can't prove they go in a low-scoring game. And when you look at the totals, at least for the week, we're not seeing any 50s this week, which is kind of amazing. Going up and down actually Houston, Tennessee's at 50 right now, but past that, the Rams and the Cowboys almost up there. I still can't see where it's going to go over the total.
Yeah, second highest total. It's Houston, Tennessee. We'll get into that. Real quick thoughts on Ezekiel Elliott this week, Grant.
He doesn't make probably any of my builds. I mean, he's priced there at 7.8. We got Henry, who's been fantastic at 8.5. We got McCaffrey a little bit cheaper than we've seen at 10K. We've got Melvin Gordon sitting there at 6.5. We have, who else is there? Dalvin Cook sitting there at 7.9. There's too many other guys that are just better plays this week. And Zeke, we haven't seen do a whole lot pretty much all season long. I don't see the massive upside from him like I've seen in the past, and I just don't think he's really worth it against this Rams defense that's been pretty good recently.
Rams at Dallas 425. Let's get at Houston at Tennessee. This is a 1 o'clock game. Tennessee open 1.5 point favorites. Now they're 3-point favorites. I think that's very, very interesting, K-Raj. Houston looking pretty good last week. Tennessee, on the other hand, I guess everybody's buying into their little surge here, and I think that has everything to do with Tannehill and this offense becoming explosive.
It's funny that because I'm based down in South Florida, and we saw plenty of Ryan Tannehill over the years with the Dolphins, and it just seemed like he never made that jump. And in 7 weeks, he's become the franchise quarterback of the Tennessee Titans they've been looking for, that Marcus Mariota never was. And Tannehill has just made this offense click. You go back, the guy's had an over every single game. He started 7 times or 7-0 to the over, which is unbelievable. And these numbers that the offense is putting up, I know they had a defensive touchdown against Oakland last week, but 42, 31, 42, 35, 27, 23 in the wins. And you can look back, and I know we can nitpick at every single team, and the Chargers should have probably beat them on that Melvin Gordon touchdown. That wasn't a touchdown. The Buccaneers had that field goal return that was whistled down. The Chiefs had them beat, and they botched the field goal attempt, and Tannehill took them down. So I know Tennessee has escaped in some of these games that you can say maybe they shouldn't have. But the point is, they're in a position to win the AFC South. And they get Houston twice in the final 3 weeks of the season, just the way the schedule is broken. They haven't faced them yet. And the way Tennessee has played at home, that they keep winning, they keep rolling. They've only been an underdog once in this span, and that was to the Chiefs in that wild game. I know they allowed a ton of yards to Patrick Mahomes in that contest. But at the same time, the way Tennessee is playing, it's just really hard to not back them. And for Houston, I get that they had the letdown spot against Denver, and Drew Lock played well last week, and they had the fumble return, which was very helpful to give them a 14-0 lead, the Broncos. And now Houston heads on the road, where last time they were on the road, they went to Baltimore, and they got smacked in the face by Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. But this Houston team, they do have a win at Kansas City on the road. They do have a win over the Chargers on the road earlier in the year. But the way Tennessee's playing at home right now, and at least overall, they're moving along. And Derrick Henry's been great in the backfield. It's just hard to go on Houston right now.
Yeah, my bad. I mean, it was Denver just blowing them out after Houston got that great win against the Patriots. So, Grant, here's the guy I want to start with in DFS, and that's A.J. Brown. He has been absolutely explosive in 2 of the last 3 weeks, 26.5, then 7.5, then 36.6. Doesn't he have to be considered in GPPs? And how much can you trust him this week?
I mean, I don't think you can trust him, but because of that, he has to be considered in GPPs. We've seen such massive upside from him at any given time here. He can go for an 80-yard catch, a 70-yard catch at any given time. Tannehill's been playing fantastic, and he clearly has a connection with A.J. Brown. So for cash, you can't consider him at 6K, but for tournaments, he's one of the better plays on the board here. We know how big his ceiling is, so that makes a perfect GPP equation here. And this is one of the highest total games, if not, it is the highest total game as of right now on the entire board here. And Tannehill has shown a big upside, and pairing him with AJ Green is just the obvious thing to do. So yes, we have to consider him for tournaments, and you have to consider Tannehill for tournaments too. Outside of that, like the other guy that I'm really looking at is Derrick Henry over on Tennessee. We saw last year they just was smashing the second half of the season. And we're seeing it again, 27, 32, 36, 24, or 25 rather, in the last 5 weeks. He has been just on an absolute explosion. His price is getting up there where people aren't going to play him. But when you consider it what his floor actually is, which is probably 100 yards and a touchdown, like you're getting 18 points out of him there, and that's pretty much his floor. We don't see that too often with running backs, and people tend to shy away from him because he doesn't get a whole lot of receiving game work. But we're seeing the same type of guy that we saw at AP multiple years ago when he had about 2,000 yards. Like, I'm not saying that Henry is as good as AP. I'm not saying that at all, but how he's played recently, I think AP averaged around 6 yards a carry, but he was getting the workload that Derrick Henry is getting right now. So we could see a 150-yard game and 2 touchdowns for him any given week. So at 8.5, you're getting that floor and you're getting that 30-point ceiling that people just don't really see with other running backs because of the workload share that they get with other running backs and because of the way that just some offenses now run and they just don't run as much. Tennessee's shown the just propensity to run on every single game. Tannehill, he's been putting up these massive numbers. Last 4 weeks, 27 passing attempts, 22 passing attempts, 18 passing attempts, and 19 passing attempts. He's been hyper efficient, but if he is going to throw the ball a lot, then he can put up a big game. We saw him throw 39 times against Carolina, put up 331 yards, and didn't even get that many touchdowns. Still put up a 28-point game because he can get stuff done with his legs too. So I think it's a spot where Tennessee, you're either taking Tannehill and A.J. Brown, or you're going with Derrick Henry, and you're safe on either one. Like, one of them is going to go off. The other one's probably going to do fine.
Hey, is Tannehill cash viable then? I mean, on FanDuel, he's 7,600. He's right there with Matt Ryan going up against San Francisco. On DraftKings, he's a little bit higher. I think he is the 5th highest priced quarterback. Do you feel comfortable the floor is there with Tannehill?
I think I'm comfortable. Is he the top option? No. I'd probably rather go with Deshaun Watson just because of his rushing upside. Or I'd rather go down to Goff just because he's got a decent matchup here. It's a bit of a price and things too. He's at the point at 6,500 where he's probably priced up a little bit too much to be the top cash game option, but he is a guy that should end up with a floor around 20 points. So this is a good spot here, and I kind of want to wait and see what the weather's going to be like. We're getting at the point of the year where weather will have an impact on things, and being in Nashville, we don't know if it's going to be cold. We don't know if it's going to be windy. We don't know if it's going to be wet. Like, weather will have an impact, and considering that we have Goff playing in a dome in Dallas gives him a little bit of an upgrade.
Hey, Devin is our producer back in the Nashville studios. What's the weather this weekend? Come on, man, get it together. Real quick, K-Raj, betting perspective on the total. It got bet up from 47.5 to 49.5, 50. Are you buying into this game becoming a shootout?
It well possibly can. And when you look at some of the numbers on the road that the Texans have put up, they scored 28 in the opener against New Orleans, 27 against the Chargers, 31 against the Chiefs, 23 against the Colts, 26 in the game in London against Jacksonville. The only real clunker they've had on the road was at Baltimore, that 41-7 loss. So really, Houston can score on the road, and the way Tennessee has played, there's no reason to think why they can't do it. And just, I guess, a quick side note that we'll keep that in mind in 2 weeks when these teams play again in Houston, that if you have that high-scoring affair, maybe they'll jack the total up, and then you go opposite the second time, or if it ends up being a low-scoring affair this time, go over to the second. So you kind of keep an eye on that for future reference coming up in Week 17. But also with this Texan team, just, I guess, on another note, Holden, that there's just been some games. I know New England, they were in control of that whole game. Jacksonville, they were. But also, you know, the Charger game early in the season, they were down in the first half, rallied in the second half. Leonard Fournette couldn't get the 2-point conversion in Week 2 that would have beaten them. The Raiders lost by 3 to them. They probably should have lost to the Colts at home. That this Houston team has snuck by in a lot of games, it feels like, this season. I know you can argue and say they should have beat New Orleans back in Week 1. They gave up that last second field goal. But this Texan team, it just feels like they've been living on the edge this entire season. And I just don't know if you can trust them moving forward. This is a team that really, when it's all said and done, they could be the ones holding the bag when the playoffs hit and Tennessee wins the South and Buffalo and Pittsburgh are your wild card teams.
All right, real quick, Grant, because we didn't talk about Hopkins, Nuck Hopkins, and maybe you did, and I just didn't hear you. But we got him. We got Duke Johnson, who has caught 11 of 14 targets the last 2 weeks. Still don't see the upside there, but you got Hopkins at 8,000 on DraftKings. Are you considering, besides for Watson, anybody? I mean, you'd have to pair him with somebody, right? Wouldn't that be Hopkins?
Yeah, it would be Hopkins, and a lot of it depends on whether Fuller ends up playing or not. I think that he should be fine. It's a hamstring injury, so those can always get re-aggravated. Those can always linger a little bit. So if Fuller's out, I think you have to consider Hopkins. If Fuller isn't, I think you still consider Hopkins. This week, looking at it, with Mike Evans out for the rest of the season, I think everyone's going to look at Godwin there for $300 cheaper. So this is a potential slate where Hopkins comes in at drastically lower ownership. This game could go any number of ways. We've seen Tennessee get up big on opponents early on, and we've seen Houston get down big on opponents early on. And those are the cases where Hopkins ends up going up for massive games. With Fuller's out, then there's obviously a little less depth there. It's not an easy defensive matchup, but with the lack of other options in this offense, we could see Hopkins getting a 15, 14, 13 target game, in which case the ceiling is 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So pivoting off of Godwin to Hopkins is a beautiful move in GPPs, especially if Fuller's out.
All right, we got a 225, 425. I'm in Denver. So 425 Atlanta at San Francisco. Niners, 11-point favorites. I don't think there's been much movement at all in this game, K-Raj. San Francisco just steamrolling right now. Atlanta now down their second best wide receiver option with Calvin Ridley. Everything's just working for San Francisco on both sides of the ball. And I know that they gave up 44 points?
46.
Something like that. 46 to the Saints, but I mean, that's an anomaly. That's one game there. So 11's a big number, but Atlanta's going on the road playing outside against a team that's playing as well as anybody.
They are, and I feel like it sets up to potentially look at the Falcons, and I'll tell you why. This is why we're here. Off of the, do we just end it now? Just say Atlanta?
No, please let us know.
Expound. Keep going.
You're getting the big bucks for this. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. This is why I'm sitting in the closet. So the last 3 weeks for San Francisco, as rigorous of a 3-week stretch as you would see. Green Bay, Baltimore, and New Orleans. And they steamroll Green Bay on that Sunday night. They lose to Baltimore to last-second field goal. They beat New Orleans at a last-second field goal. So, obviously, they came out of this pretty nicely, going 2-1, and your only loss is a non-conference game against the Ravens. So, that is as well as it could have gone for the 49ers. Coming up for the 49ers, they get the Rams at home next week in a revenge game, and at Seattle. Actually, excuse me, not a revenge game because they beat the Rams. But they still get the Rams at home, and then at Seattle in a revenge game in Week 17 that could be for the division depending on how things go. Now you have the Atlanta Falcons coming in who have a losing record and just aren't playing very well. I know they came off a win over Carolina last week, but Atlanta, who it seems like they've thrown in the towel. Feels like this could be the week to take this amount of points with Atlanta because you know what, Holden? Last time they were a double-digit underdog like this on the road, they went to New Orleans and destroyed the Saints. And this was off the bye week, understandably, but this is a Falcon team that we know they have the weapons. And this is not a team that has David Blau at quarterback or has any of these other guys that just you got no shot with. That you still have Matt Ryan. And they're coming off a 40-point effort against Carolina. And, yeah, they lost to New Orleans at home. They lost to Tampa Bay at home. But they are 3-2 the last 5 games, and that doesn't really mean a lot, you would think. But at the same time, I just think this is a terrible spot for San Francisco, laying this amount of points. And just because of what you have ahead, you have 2 big divisional games ahead. You're coming off this huge game at New Orleans, basically for home field, or at least it seems like it. That how do you get up lay 11 against Atlanta? I think the Falcons got to be worth a look here with all these points.
I think we saw that with Houston last week too. I mean, they're facing a rookie quarterback at home against the Broncos. Boom. Really the Broncos blew them out. It wasn't really that close of a game. Grant, I want to start with Calvin Ridley's replacement. So I listened to a lot of press conferences during the week, and Dan Quinn said that Christian Blake was going to be the guy to take over for Ridley in that spot. So, we've seen Russell Gage have some success too, but that was when Julio was down. Is it even worth a shot on Christian Blake, who a couple of weeks ago when he was in there, caught 6 of 9 targets, 57 yards. He's 3,100 on DraftKings. Are you going with any of these guys, Gage, Blake, Akarias, whatever the hell his name is? You looking at any of these three guys?
Blake's the one that I'm probably looking at. He's 3,100. Okay. Like Gage, I would have a preference to if he were cheaper, but he's $5K. It doesn't really seem worth it. San Francisco has been the top pass defense in the entire league. So it's strictly getting the value with Blake, who's probably going to get there in garbage time. I assume that they're going to be trying to shut down Julio Jones. So that's just going to force targets to other guys. And, well, you can't really trust any of them. Blake's sitting there at 3,100, a guy that had 9 targets 2 of the last 3 weeks. Granted, he had 0 on the other one. Is a guy that you kind of have to look at. And I see a lot of people probably going with Julio in this matchup. He's 7K. I know he hasn't had his greatest season in the world, but he's still getting 10 points each and every single week and has upside for 30, even in a tough matchup like this where we just saw Michael Thomas go for a massive game. I think 35 points. So Julio Jones is definitely a guy that you can look at, even in a tough matchup going up against San Fran, because even if they scheme to try and shut him down, they schemed to try and shut down Michael Thomas. We all see how that went. Outside of him, the only other guys that I'm really looking at in this matchup are going to be Devonta Freeman, guy that is the mainstay in this offense. He's a clear lead back. He's involved in the receiving game. He's getting 15-plus touches every single week and has the potential for 7-8 receptions just because he couldn't end up getting those dump-offs late in the game. And then Morstead has been Mustard has been fantastic recently. You just watch him play, and he's been good. He's been getting more work in this offense. 10 rushes last week, 19 the week before. A little bit involved in the receiving game. Has some touchdown equity. No one wants to play him because it's essentially a 3-headed back in San Francisco, and so everyone tends to avoid these. But at 5.2K, you're getting a decent amount of upside. And then lastly, Kittle.
Real quick, Grant, before you get into that, I almost look at Mostert at this point as cash viable. And you look at him, you look at efficiency, and you'll say, gosh, he can't continue to be efficient. I just think there's some guys that are so efficient, and this is one of them.
Yeah. Numbers kind of say that someone's going to end up regressing eventually. He's averaging over 7 yards a carry in the last 3 weeks. Do I think that's possible? No. But if he ends up getting 15 touches and he averages 5 yards a carry, gets into the end zone at 5.2K, that'll more than pay off value. Shanahan, we know him. We know his father. They always just spend all their time figuring out these incredible rushing schemes, and that's just what they sit and do, and they crush it every single week with every single running back. We saw Denver have multiple 1,000-yard rushers that – who are these guys? We don't even know who they are. So they can do it with pretty much anyone. They're fantastic. And it's going up against Atlanta. They're 10-point favorites or whatever point favorites. And so I could easily see him being a hyper-efficient guy and getting 6 yards a carry with a potential for an 8 yards a carry.
K-Raj, I'm looking at the total. Open at 45.5. Now it's 47. My bad for not mentioning the injuries here. D Ford out. So that's somebody getting pressure on the quarterback. Richard Sherman out. Quan Williams, concussion protocol. This is a massive amount of key injuries on the Niners side defensively that could have a massive effect on this game. You were talking about maybe going on the Atlanta side. They're getting 11 points. But how does that factor into this game, and how does that factor into the total?
Well, I think I think number one, Holden, what we deal with all the time, and it's what you guys deal with in DFS, it's everything, it is all perception. That you look, they scored 48 points this past week against New Orleans. They're going to score a ton of points again just because. And really, when you think of San Francisco, you don't think of offense, you think of defense. Mm-hmm. And the defensive numbers they put up, and look, they played Drew Brees and the Saints last week. Nobody thought this was going to happen. But also, they put up those points. The Niners put up 500 yards of offense. I think that Jimmy Garoppolo and what he was able to do is probably more of the exception than the rule, that Garoppolo will probably maybe take a step back. And for Atlanta, I know the defensive numbers have been ugly this year, but they've been better of late. And really the last 5 games, for the exception of that Tampa Bay game where they gave up 35 to the Buccaneers, the defense has been better for the Falcons. I just look at this game, and you mentioned with the injuries and with the total here that I got to think this one stays under, that you'll have a little more probably ball control with San Francisco here. I don't think Atlanta's going to go up and down the field necessarily. I mean, the 40 points they put up against Carolina before that, they're scoring 18, 22, 29, 26, and even that Carolina game, they had a punt return for a touchdown. So Atlanta's not going to light it up necessarily, even with San Francisco's injuries defensively. I just think that this is going to be one of those games that it'll be a little closer, but also low scoring after we saw what happened in New Orleans this past week.
All right, let's get on to our last game. It'll be a showdown slate for DFS, but for you, K-Raj, we're going to talk about the betting perspective and Buffalo at Pittsburgh. This game was flexed to Sunday night. Steelers open 1-point favorites. Now they're 2-point favorites at home against a Buffalo team. Like, hey, they can't beat anybody. They played the Ravens really, really tight. Let's start with this one here. Buffalo getting a couple of points on the road at Pittsburgh. Really good Buffalo defense going up against a rookie quarterback. Juju Smith-Schuster might be back. I'm not too concerned about that. But one thing that I like here is the Pittsburgh defense. They have really, really stepped up as the season's gone on.
They have, and an extremely difficult game to handicap. And the NFL did a good job by moving this game to the Sunday night. You had Vikings-Chargers was the original Sunday night game, and now this one has so many playoff implications behind it. And obviously Pittsburgh's not going to catch Baltimore in the north, but they still have a shot to get in the wild card. And when you look at the defensive numbers first for the Steelers, I know they had a couple interceptions on Kyler Murray last week, but 17, 13, 10, 21, 12 the last 5 weeks. Those are pretty good numbers for Pittsburgh. And Devlin Hodges is doing his job, that don't turn the ball over, keep the Steelers in the game. And so far, he has done that. He hasn't lost a start so far since taking over for Mason Rudolph. And if that's the guy going forward, it's got to be the guy. He's going to win. And this is the Steelers, what they've been able to do. This is their final home regular season game of the season. We got to assume final home game as well, because they'll be on the road in the playoffs. But for Buffalo, when you look at what they've done, and I know you mentioned, and unfortunately this is what it is with them. They have 9 wins, but you say how many of those wins have come against teams with a winning record? And the only one right now is Tennessee. And early on, you didn't think Tennessee would be that team, because that was Marcus Mariota at quarterback in that 14-7 game. The Titans missed a bunch of field goals back in October, and that could have been a game Tennessee would have won. And I know we can't go to if Ryan Tannehill played, it would have been different. He didn't play, so Buffalo still won that game. But they lose to Baltimore last week, who we see what they have been capable of offensively over the last few months. And I just got to say, for Buffalo, I'd probably side with them just because they've been a really good road underdog. I know the only loss came to Cleveland in that 1916 game, and Buffalo goes to New England coming up next Saturday. And that one, I'm not going to say will decide the division title, because the Patriots will beat the Bengals. I mean, after they had the cameras in the booth, the Patriots will definitely beat them now. That's what they needed over a few days ago. But as far as Pittsburgh goes, they did come back to beat Cleveland 2 weeks ago in that revenge game. They held off Cincinnati. They held off Arizona. I hate to say it like this, and nobody thought we would have the statement in Week 15, but you're stepping up in class now against Buffalo as opposed to some of the teams you played. I mean, it's hard to say, but it's true.
You're right.
I know it's funny, but it's true. And for Pittsburgh, they've been rolling at home. Last time they lost a home game was to Baltimore back in October. I think Buffalo may get them here.
All right, we don't have the showdown slate up yet on DraftKings, Grant, but it's going to be there with Atlanta and San Francisco, with Buffalo and Pittsburgh. And I think there's just some players in particular that we need to talk about. Let's start with the Buffalo side. I mean, any upside there at wide receiver? What do we do at running back? You'd think that Josh Allen's going to be pretty popular too. Buffalo side first.
I mean, it's interesting with Josh Allen. So you look at his numbers, and generally home road splits are a lot of noise. It's not with Josh Allen. Like, looking at overall numbers on the season, 246 passing yards per game on the road, 179. The problem is it's almost strictly because of weather. Weather in Buffalo has been terrible almost every single game. And Pittsburgh, it can be the exact same scenario. It's probably going to be cold. It's a Sunday night game, which makes it even colder. The wind is what I'm more worried about here, and it's something you'll have to look at more as the week goes on and right before the game. If it's going to be windy, it gives me a little bit less interest in Josh Allen and his wide receivers. If it's not going to be windy, I think John Brown is a fantastic option to pair with Josh Allen. He's a guy that is getting a heavy volume of targets on pretty much a weekly basis. And you look at the home road numbers again, John Brown's a guy that relies a bit on the deep ball. Like looking at his home road splits, 11.5 games points per game at home, 19.4 on the road. He's clearly the number one guy here. He can absolutely get it done. So in a game where there's some potential wind or without any potential wind, I love John Brown. If there is wind, it's a Cole Beasley game. Like again,
he scored 6 of 8?
I think so, something like that.
Yeah, 3 in a row and 6 of 8.
Yeah, and you look at his home road numbers, it's kind of like he gets shallow targets. He's definitely a guy that's a big option in the end zone, but averaging 13.8 points at home because he's more of the dump-off guy, and only 11.9 on the road. So if this is going to be a win game, then Beasley's the guy that I end up going with, and it's probably him and Singletary because I'm guessing they're going to run on the ground. Singletary is averaging over 5 yards a carry on the season here. We look at the last 3 weeks, 17.8, 19.1, 15.4, averaging 17 touches a game or rushing attempts a game. Getting involved in the passing game here. It's clearly his backfield, and these have been up against easy opponents. Baltimore, Dallas, Denver, good defenses. So Pittsburgh's tough defense isn't going to matter as much, and Singletary hasn't really been getting into the end zone too much this season. So it all depends on the wind. If there's not much wind, it's Allen and John Brown. If there is, then it's Singletary and Beasley.
So I guess the win will play factor into this too, K-Raj, and the total, which is sitting there at 36.5. I mean, this is just about as low as you can go here on a Sunday night. And I know NBC and the NFL are rooting for a 56.5 total, but 36.5, how weather dependent is this? Do you have any skin in the game right now?
I wouldn't. I'd stay away from it. I don't like these low totals just because you can have the defensive touchdown, the special teams touchdown you don't really expect and can mess things up. But, I mean, we saw a few weeks ago was Buffalo and Denver played and two defensive teams, low total, and it went right to script and it stayed under the total. I mean, the only reason why you go over here is just to go contrarian. It's simply that. I mean, Pittsburgh's numbers, I mentioned what they've done defensively before, and they're right now on a 5-0 under run. And when you look at Buffalo, they're on a 5-1 under run. The only game that went over in that span was against the Dolphins in Miami. It was a low total. It was 37-20. But we know Buffalo's excellent defensively. Pittsburgh's excellent defensively. Buffalo's not great offensively. Pittsburgh isn't great offensively. But we'll see if the Steelers get some of those guys back this week to help out the offense. But I'm staying away from the total. But I mean, you would say under because everything points to it. Over would just mean that you're going to buck the trend, and I'm not comfortable with that.
Join the club. So that's our 5 games there. Hopefully you got enough information to help you out in week number 15. Oh, my God. It's just gone. It always goes too quick, and we're coming down to the wire. Not in DFS or sports betting, though, because we can go all the way through the Super Bowl and betting and then through the conference championship games and even a showdown slate in the Super Bowl as well. I want to remind everybody, hit the like and subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube right now. If you're not, just go ahead and do it anyways because you probably got a couple of minutes if you had enough time to watch this. K-Raj, why don't you give us a little plug here? Where can we find you? Where's the closet? What's the website? Give us everything.
The closet is in the basement of Holden Kushner's house. So I'm just.
It's not true.
Downstairs.
That's where I am right now.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought it was a little loud in here.
Yeah.
But you can find me on Twitter at VIRogers, VIROGERS, and also on VegasInsider.com. And past the football, we have plenty of NBA, college basketball. The bowls are coming up in just a few weeks. So we got plenty of those to preview, and there's about 100 bowls. So there's plenty of games to wager on. And yeah, so past football, once it's done, we still keep going with all the basketball.
Grant, you want to plug anything?
No, I do a way too early podcast We recorded it last night, the absolutely epic early week podcast. You can find it on the RG page. Yeah, so if you're looking for some football content and you're done with this and you need some more, go ahead and check that out.
Does it do anything for you that early in the week? I mean,
it got me on Marcus Johnson last week.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah.
So I'll listen for an hour and I'll try and find that one player that separates it. You love it. I was on Deontay Johnson last week. I got lucky.
Yeah, so was I. The problem is the rest of my lineup's set. Every lineup I had him in, the rest of it was trash.
Oh, Devontae Parker was the one that kept me from really big money last week. It was finally a good week, though. Actually, it's been pretty good lately. Not to your extent, because you're probably placing about 30 times the amount of money than I am. But hey, whatever.
I had a nice 1% margin last week.
That's it. We're done. Devin back in the Nashville studios. Great job. Grant, K-Rod, you take care of yourselves. I'm Holden Kushner. Follow me on Twitter at Holden Radio. Like and subscribe to RotoGrinders YouTube channel. Adios. We'll catch you next week, week 16.
See you, kids.